So I'd be happy to know a little more about y'all and give some couple of minutes for the others to join in as well. Today is a very interesting topic and a sought for speaker. So I think we'll allow people to just come in. I can see the numbers going up. Let me tell you a little about Global Linker before we get started. As all of you know, it's a free solution, which is actually easy to join and quick to implement, but it's by invitation only. So either you could be invited by a reputed organization, a trade body, or a government body. And the real idea is to make SMEs discoverable and transaction ready in this digital era. So one of the initiatives that we launched is the Global Linker Growth Talks initiative. And as you know, growth doesn't really take place by mere chance, right? It's the result of various forces coming together. And so therefore, we've actually brought the industry specialists and domain experts to share practical knowledge with our growing community. Hi everybody. We'll start sharp at 5:05. If you do have any questions, please post them in the Q&A section or the chat box, preferably the Q&A section. Our expert, Mr. Vedanarayanan, will actually answer them towards the end of the session. Our speaker today, Mr. Vedanarayanan, I will be doing an introduction, but I thought I'll just tell you about a couple of specialities of his and programs or schools that he currently holds programs in. He is a visiting faculty member at various top B schools, whether that's IIM Bangalore, IIM Indore, Kashipur. He's done various digital conferences worldwide. He also consults early stage startups and through incubators on branding. Okay, so I think the numbers are now going up. Great. So Mr. Vedanarayanan is currently the SME and Startup Business Head at the organization Razorpay. He has helped build and grow multiple digital products and brands across health tech, ed tech, online travel, and more. He also possesses a varied mix of global experiences spanning from digital marketing, influencer marketing, brand consulting, business development, product management, and more. And he is, like I said, a visiting faculty member at various top B schools in the country. We are pleased to have you, Mr. Veda.
Thank you so much, Malvika. Thanks for the kind words, and a big hello to all of the people who've turned up here today. Very excited to be here. I hope all of you are safe and sound. Your employees, colleagues, loved ones, everybody is safe and sound. We live in pretty crazy times, and looks like, hopefully, by God's grace, we are at the fag end of all of the craziness. And thank you so much for having me here. A big thank you to Malvika and to the Global Linker team.
Thank you. So without further delay, I think we have received a lot of questions prior to the session as well. A lot of people today want to know about influencer marketing. How do they engage an influencer? What do they do? Where do they get started? Since it's a very new trend, but a large one at that, I think people are itching to know from you. So we just get deep dive into the topic. Over to you.
Sure. Let me just take a moment to share my screen. Are you able to see my screen all right?
Yes.
Awesome. So today, what we're going to do is we look at what influencer marketing is all about. We'll also understand at what point in your business or brand's life cycle should you actually consider influencer marketing. That's also something which is important, and that varies from a business to business. There is a lot of misconceptions which are there in the market around what influencer marketing is, what it's not, etc. So hopefully we'll try to bust a few myths. I'll also take you through some examples and my own experiences that I've been through, where we've tried to apply influencer marketing in some shape or form in various categories: health tech, fintech, etc. And I'll take you through how those experiences have panned out. And I would love to hear any feedback you might have or any questions that you might have towards the end of the conversation. So in terms of the structure, we have an hour ahead of us. So I'll spend the first 35-40 minutes in running through the content. The last 20-25 minutes short, we'll leave it for Q&A. Yeah. So we'll start off by understanding what influencer marketing is, the various types of media exposure. Why do you need influencer marketing? What are some of the building blocks that go into making a successful influencer marketing campaign? What are some of the business benefits that you can expect? When should you consider influencer marketing? Something that's very important. And then we'll get into the how, something that's very important. How do you actually run influencer marketing? Should I work with a really large influencer, or should I work with a bunch of really small influencers? Should I work with macro guys? Should I work with micro guys? Or a new term which is there, which is nano. Should I work with a whole bunch of nano influencers? And should it be subtle or should it be overt? Right? And these are a lot of questions that people have in terms of communication strategy. So we'll try to understand that as well with some examples. And I'll give you some simple frameworks and rules of thumb, which you can hopefully go back and apply in your own business situations and scenarios. And then I'll give you a sense of what are some of the popular platforms that you could potentially consider if you want to start running influencer marketing campaigns. Of course, you could ignore all of these platforms and do it on your own. You could handpick and curate your own influencers, or you could outsource it to an agency, or you could also use marketplaces and platforms, which I will introduce you to, which can help you discover influencers based on your category, your demographic profile, customer preferences, etc. Start off, like I said, influencer marketing essentially is a digital first approach, and more importantly, it is a social media first approach for driving earned media exposure for the brand. And here is the important one: it straddles that fairly thick blurred line between overt and covert forms of marketing. Now, what is the difference between influencer marketing and regular forms of paid advertisements, right? Let's say I hire Amitabh Bachchan and I run an ad, a TV ad featuring Amitabh Bachchan, where Amitabh Bachchan says, actually go ahead and use this app, download this app now, right? That is very, very overt. So the ideal way in which influencer marketing should be run, if you go by the textbook definition, is it needs to be a lot more subtle. It needs to be slice of life-ish, if I were to use that term. So if Amitabh Bachchan were to have a very subtle nudge that pushes people towards the brand, wherein the brand actually inserts itself as a slice of life moment in his everyday life, for example. And I'll give you some examples of what we tried, at Healthify Me using strategies such as these. Then it becomes closer to the classical definition of influencer marketing. Of course, today, people use influencer marketing for every single thing. A lot of people come back, I've taught this at a few B schools in India. Students come back and ask me, what's the difference between regular brand sponsorship and just influencer marketing? Is this just a newfangled word? Is it just semantics? What is the big difference, right? I've hired a big brand ambassador. I'm paying him truckloads of money. Isn't that influencer marketing? So the difference comes through in the manner of execution. Now, if it is extremely overt, then it becomes regular kind of brand sponsorship where you have a celebrity being involved. If it's a lot more covert or subtle, then it becomes closer to the classical definition of influencer marketing. Of course, there are, again, a lot of people use influencer marketing and they call it influencer marketing even when they use it overtly. And the definition has become fairly stretched, but I'm just telling you what the classical definition is. Now, influencer marketing, as I said, it is a part science, part art form, unlike, say, performance marketing or SEO, right, which is fairly cut and dried. And it gives you very predictable results, and it is almost 99% scientific. You can run it like a pure science. Here, unfortunately, it hasn't evolved to the point where it is completely scientific. It is a part science, part art form, and the results are not always predictable, and more importantly, the results are not short term. And that is something as entrepreneurs you need to be comfortable with. Are you willing to wait and play the waiting game when it comes to influencer marketing? And this is not your regular dhanda driving campaign. This is not something that will put food on the table and drive customers for you in an attributable fashion in the short term. Is that something you're comfortable with? Of course, in certain categories, it's still good. There are always exceptions, but not always, will it give you predictable results. So as I said, it's digital first, social media first. And this is important. This is advertising, which sometimes masquerades as editorial. because it's covert. Now, there have been some rules passed in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia. In India, the rules are not so strict, where if I have taken money, for example, I'm a social media influencer, I've taken money to endorse Malavika, for example, I should call out that I have taken money and this is a sponsored post. That's a legal requirement. In India, it's not quite tight as yet. And there is this concept of advertorial. Some of you might be aware in print, wherein you have editorial content. It's actually paid for. It's not pure editorial, but it's essentially advertising content which masquerades as editorial content. Now, there were some guidelines passed around that which said that you need to have something which calls this out being separate. So, and the publications are also smart. They just change the font subtly, or they just say it's a brand exclusive just to make it sufficiently confusing enough so it stays vague. But the idea is, again, influencer marketing, it is advertising masquerading as editorial, pure and simple. That essentially is how it works. One of the best examples, and I don't know how many of you attended the last session that I had conducted at Global Linker a few months ago, where I spoke about the Kolavari song going viral in India almost a decade ago to the date. And to the day, and that was actually one of the earliest examples of influencer marketing. They used influencers really, really well. They didn't use traditional forms of marketing. They didn't run Google ads, they didn't run Facebook ads, but they used influencers and they paid them as well. The person actually said they spent zero. They actually did spend money, but they spent it in these kinds of subtle forms of marketing where the reader wouldn't even know that this is paid for. Now, of course, audiences are a lot more discerning and they are smart and they might be able to make out, but back in the day, they didn't actually know that. Almost, by the way, let me tell you something. Almost every single hashtag trending activity that you see on Twitter today in India is all paid for by influencers, by brands, or in some cases political parties. But in almost all cases, it is paid for. Some of them are, of course, organic, but a lot of them are paid for. Especially if you see brand endorsements, they're all paid for. Again, they use influencer marketing and they use a whole bunch of influencers to drive hashtag trending activities. And there are agencies that help you do this as well for a fee. ROI measurements gets a little difficult, and like I said, the influencers you use can be really large guys, Hrithik Roshan, Kareena Kapoor, Saif Ali Khan. It could be as big as them, or it could be micro and nano influencers, people who are more relatable to your target audience, and I'll give you examples of this. And it is a long-term play for the most part. There are exceptions, of course. Now, here's the interesting question: when do you need influencer marketing? Now, this is a question that a lot of people have, and before we get into when, let's understand why do you need this. We've done a lot of surveys with millennials and with users from various age groups. And one of the clear things that is coming through, why do you need influencer marketing? Some people have got up and said, Veda, why do we even need this? Why can't I just be happy running ads on Google and Facebook and doing my SEO? And the answer to that is, there is a certain level of distrust that comes through when you see an ad from a brand. Now, for example, if Malavika is surfing on Facebook, she sees an ad from a brand, let me just swipe this and move on. I want to see what my friends are up to. I don't want to see another advertisement from a brand, right? That essentially is what she's thinking about. Now, on the other hand, if there is a message which is coming through from somebody whom she admires, or more importantly, somebody from her inner circle of friends, if not family, at least the network of friends, an individual who is essentially talking about a brand in a very relatable, matter of fact, slice of life-ish fashion, then Malavika is more interested. She's more plugged in, and the kind of brand trust and brand salience that kind of communication drives is a lot higher than the kind of communication that a pure advertising campaign would drive, which is one of the fundamental reasons why influencer marketing is even relevant. And going back to the question on when, the key question is, and there is no, and I'm just telling this to you purely from my own experience, and there is no one size fits all approach. You typically try influencer marketing when you've started hitting some kind of a glass ceiling in your performance marketing and your organic efforts. I'm always a big believer that you need to make sure that you maximize the kind of returns that you can get from your core, predictable, dhanda driving. Dhanda is a word that I like to use a lot. Dhanda driving marketing campaigns, right? Which is your performance marketing, your SEO efforts, your content efforts. Make sure you're able to drive predictable ROI. And you need to use influencer marketing as a force amplifier that helps you amplify the effect of all of your force campaigns, like your performance marketing campaigns, etc. And you typically use that at a point in life cycle where you started seeing diminishing marginal utility for your performance marketing or for your marketing investments, which means earlier, if for every dollar investment in marketing, if you're getting $10 in return, and today, maybe a year, a couple of years down the line, because you've gone past the early adopters, all the early adopters have come to you. Now you're going deeper into the pyramid. You're finding it harder to acquire that next customer. So you're for every dollar in marketing spend, you're probably not getting 10 in return. You're probably getting 6 or 7. So in such scenarios, that essentially is when you start looking for avenues such as influencer marketing. But having said that, one of the things that you need to be careful of, especially in the Indian context, if your target market is India, if you're looking at a lot of influencers in India, India unfortunately also has the distinction of being the world's second largest destination of the maximum number of social media frauds. A lot of people masquerade as influencers by boosting up their follower counts, and there are agencies that do this again for a fee, right? And brands get fooled into considering them as real influencers. So you've got to be very careful. Some quick rules of thumb that I would suggest if you're picking an influencer is see how many followers they have and the kind of engagement that they get on their posts. If the follower count is very high but the engagement numbers are very low, that's a warning sign. Or if there are a lot of likes in the engagements but there are zero comments or little to no comments, then again it's a warning signal. Because a lot of these agencies, what they essentially do is they employ bots, which are not real people, which have fake social media profiles, and they essentially are software programs which go and follow. Say Malavika's profile, for example. Malavika's paid me a bunch of money. She wants to have her Twitter handle needs to have 1 million followers tomorrow. She can make that happen, right? So you've got to check for the kind of engagement. No, I can still game that by saying that I like all of the posts that she puts out, so it looks believable, a follow account. But comments aren't necessarily. So you've got to look for a combination of factors such as these, or like I mentioned at the beginning, I will take you through some platforms, popular platforms, which do this heavy lifting for you. They give you influencers who are already vetted, who've already gone through a certain level of a vetting process. So you can never be completely certain in life, but you can be a lot more certain than if you were to do the curation yourself. Now, before I take you through some of the hows on how you run influencer marketing campaigns, I want to keep this session as interactive as we can keep it to. So I want to leave a lot of time for questions. I'm very cognizant of that. But let's understand what are some of the key metrics. What would success look like if you're running an influencer marketing campaign? What are some of the key metrics for you to measure before we run into the hows and some few caselets that I have lined up? The first one is conversion, of course, which matters for any business. So you need to see what kind of ROI in revenue terms your influencer marketing campaign is able to drive. But it isn't something that you measure from day zero. It's something that you measure over time, and you don't just measure this for your influencer marketing campaign itself. You measure it for your marketing mix overall. The way marketing campaigns work is very similar to a football team, right? Very similar to a defender passing the ball to a midfielder who passes it to a Ronaldo who scores the goal. While Ronaldo might take all the credit, it's the entire team that has contributed in actually scoring that goal. In a very similar fashion, you don't just measure ROI from that influencer marketing channel alone. The influencer marketing channel is your midfielder who is feeding more and more balls, goal scoring balls to your strikers, which are your Google searches and the Facebooks in your marketing mix, who will go away with all of the credit. But it's the influencer marketing guy who's regularly feeding them some fantastic passes, which are helping them score goals. So you need to make sure that you look at the performance of your marketing mix overall when you look at the efficiency of your influencer marketing campaigns, and you need to do this over time, before influencer marketing campaigns versus after. What has been the improvements in my overall funnel conversion rates, overall conversion? That is how you measure efficacy of influencer campaigns. Second one, of course, is engagement. So you've got to see the kind of engagement that you're able to drive via influencer efforts. What is the kind of earned media exposure that you're able to drive for your brand through your influencer marketing campaigns? Combination of like, comments, and of course, shares. Brand buzz, mentions, search volumes, brand keyword search volume. So if you've been running focused influencer marketing campaigns for a long time, we need to see if there has been an improvement in your brand search volumes on Google, which is the clearest indicator of brand health improving. And hashtag mentions. So if you're running, say, influencer marketing campaigns focused on specific hashtags, and I'll take you through some examples. For example, at Simply Learn, we used to do at the start of every year hashtag, career wish, 2016 career wish, 2017 career wish, etc., where we asked people what were their career aspirations for the upcoming year. We started the campaign off with influencers who would tweet out their career aspirations, and then it would go assume a certain level of virality. Very similar to Healthify Me, right? Health and fitness resolutions, or unlock growth in the Razorpay context, where we try to crowdsource from the Twitterati what are their mantras for unlocking growth. And again, a lot of these campaigns are kickstarted by influencers before it assumes a certain level of virality. So all of these metrics need to be measured from an influencer marketing perspective to know if your campaign is moving in the right direction. I'll give you a quick snapshot of some popular case studies of a few brands that I've always looked up to when it comes to influencer marketing. And I'll also take you through some approaches that they have actually adopted. And I'll help you understand what the differences are in the various kinds of approaches. Now, like I mentioned at the start, there are two main variables if you are looking to run an influencer marketing campaign for your business. The first is, what kind of influencers do you want to work with? At the highest possible level, at the most philosophical level possible, you work with influencers who are macro, micro, or nano. Macro influencers are those who have followings of 100,000 and above, cumulative social media following. Micro are those who are anywhere between 5, 10,000 and this number. Nano are all of those guys who are below that. But the important thing is your engagement rates, especially if you are nano or micro, need to be upwards of 10%, which means engagement rates are the kind of cumulative of likes, comments, and shares divided by the number of followers. That needs to be at least 10%, which means you've got fantastic engagement rates. Of course, if you're a macro, engagement doesn't matter. Usually in the low single digits, but still they're macro, right? So that is the high level breakdown. So the first question you need to ask yourself as an entrepreneur, as a marketer, is to work with a macro influencer, bunch of micro influencers, or a whole lot of nano influencers? That's the first question. The second question you need to ask yourself is the kind of communication strategy that I'm employing. Does it need to be overt or does it need to be covert? Does it need to be subtle or does it need to be in your face, like a TV campaign, for example? That's the second question. These are the two main questions you need to ask yourself before you begin execution and planning and execution rather, for any influencer marketing campaign. Now I'll take you through some case studies and I would love to hear your feedback. Daniel Wellington, of course, a lot of you would have heard of this brand, fairly popular, luxury accessories brand. And, they've been doing a lot of cool stuff on influencer marketing. And they used a bunch of micro influencers and they kept it very subtle, very interestingly enough. My choice, self-driving car vehicle, car renting company. And these guys used, again, something very interesting. They used a combination of micro and macro influencers, but they kept it overt. They kept it in your face. Nike, of course, the brand needs no introduction. They use influencer marketing a lot. They work with a lot of YouTube influencers. A whole bunch of YouTube influencers. The names there, speak for themselves. So obviously, they use a lot of macro influencers and they keep it very overt. There is no hiding of the fact that these are people who are endorsing brand Nike in a very overt fashion. There is absolutely, they're making no attempts to hide this, right? Avis, of course, very popular, car rental company, global company. They use a lot of micro influencers. They don't use macro, but they keep it overt again. Now, the key question is, we've seen 4 different brands and we've seen some fairly different strategies that each of them have adopted. They've gone about, all of them are doing micro influencer marketing, right? All of them are doing influencer marketing, but they're going about it in fairly different ways. Now, how do you decide as a brand what kind of a strategy will suit your dhanda, will suit your business? That becomes a key question. So, by the way, I'd love to hear from the audience if you have any thoughts on how you go about selecting. Should it be macro, micro? If anybody has some initial thoughts, feel free to speak up. Any ideas from anybody? Please raise your hand, unmute yourself, or directly feel free to unmute yourself and speak up.
So there's a lady who says a healthy mix of micro and macro.
Yeah. Interesting. But if you had to choose, Mittal, how would you do that? How would you decide? Should it be overt? Should it be covert? Should I keep it subtle? Should I be more in your face? Should I use a large celebrity? Should I use Tiger Shroff? Or should I use somebody more down to earth and relatable? Okay, so I'll give you a simple framework now. This works for the most part, but obviously there could be scenarios where this might not necessarily work. And this is crystallized basis my experience of what I have actually seen work across various categories. I'll give you some healthy family examples as well, which will hopefully give you some clues on what kind of frameworks we can actually employ. So we did a lot of things. For those of you who are not aware of Healthy Family today is India's leading health and fitness mobile application. It is a freemium mobile app, which means there are certain aspects that are free, certain that are paid for. The free aspects involves world's largest database of Indian foods, which have accurate calorie breakdowns mapped, and vitamins, carbs, proteins, etc. So Malavika has some authentic cuisine from Assam, Lakshadweep, Andaman. She's able to track how many calories she's consumed, she's gone for a 5-kilometer jog. She knows how many calories she's burned. She's a lot more mindful of her eating habits, workout patterns. It's like a daily diary for calorie counting. That's the free aspect. Premium is people who want lose weight, gain muscle, gain strength and flexibility, overcome hypertension. Health Family assigns them, creates customized, personalized, diet plans, fitness plans, yoga plans through its teams of nutritionists and AI nutritionists, RIA, etc. So that's the freemium aspect. Now, we did multiple things at Health Family for which we tried to use influencers. So one of the first things was promoting yoga events and meetups. We used to do a lot of these yoga meetups, yogathons, etc. on World Yoga Day and other days. Right, somewhere local events in the Bangalore chapter itself, somewhere slightly more large scale across various cities in India, etc. And so for promoting these yoga events and meetups, what we typically did was we used micro influencers and we kept it overt. Yeah. For promoting, we had a new young moms plan. This was for young mothers who had recently given birth to a child who had put on a lot of body weight. And we had actually come out with a health plan specifically for them. And here we used a lot of micro influencers, but we kept it subtle, right? And this will probably give you some clues. Yeah. The other one was promoting and socializing RIA. RIA is like I mentioned, it's actually a software program. It's like a chatbot like Siri, but it is a virtual nutritionist. Here again, we used micro influencers, but we kept it subtle. Again, socializing key features of the Health Family app, micro influencers, subtle. Promoting the New Year resolution campaign, right? There we used a combination of micro and macro influencers, but we kept it overt. Yeah. So the key question you've got to ask yourself in a lot of these cases, multiple variables that are involved in helping you make that decision. The first one is this a short-term thing or is this a long-term one? Number one. Number two, what are you really looking to do? Is it credibility? Are you looking for relatability, which is one end of the spectrum, if you want to think about it? Or are you looking for coolness, brand buzz, improving the glamour quotient of the brand itself? Now, obviously, it is never a binary. It is never 0-1. People will always say, I want both. But it is a spectrum, right? It depends on which end of the spectrum are you closer to, right? Obviously, one will be slightly higher. If not, it will never be 0-100, but it will be a 60-40 in favor of one of these two ends of the spectrum. So depending on that, you need to take the call. So if it is usually glamour quotient, which is the number one thing that you're looking for, and if it is massive, enormous reach in a very short period of time, and if it is time bound, you typically go in for macro influencers. Yeah. If it is relatability, right, you want to be seen as a trusted brand and you want this to be relatable. For example, the young mothers plan, right? In that case, me getting a Katrina Kaif, for example, would have made no sense, right? For which is why I tried, and here trust is extremely important. It's not so much about glamour quotient here because it's young mothers, right, that I'm talking about. So in this case, which is why we worked with a whole bunch of micro influencers who are again, women who had recently given birth to children and gone through the same things that the target demographic is actually going through. So we handpicked them as our micro influencers. And obviously we made sure that they had a certain level of engagement with the brand, etc. And I'll give you some, tips and tricks on how you can curate and pick your influencers. For example, at Healthy Family, we never picked influencers who just work for money. Otherwise, they end up becoming mercenaries. Right? So we wanted influencers, we wanted to work with influencers who actually were invested in the brand's philosophy and the vision. So we actually would get influencers to first try out the brand, try out the app in the initial few days, and so that they get a sense and a feel of what the brand has to offer in the first place. And then we would get them to, start working on some of these campaigns. And the other thing that we very consciously did, again, in almost all cases, if you noticed, except for say the yoga meetup, which is I have a yoga meetup happening on Sunday. I can't afford to be subtle, right? So I might as well drop the pretense and be overt. But in almost all of the cases, and then hashtag trending again is a once in a year affair, right? Where there is a need for us to build a lot of reach, use a macro influencer. And in these days, given how much the audiences have evolved, I really feel using a macro influencer and keeping it subtle is actually a waste of time, because people know this today, that people will see through it. They know that Veda has taken money, for example, or Malvika has taken money. They know it, right? Even if they're macro influencers, even if they try to keep it subtle, they know this is paid for. Are yaar, isne paisa liya hai, right? So you might as well keep it overt. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is, in terms of communication strategy, one of the things that we consciously did when working with micro influencers is we did not want, high definition, high production quality shoots for the video collaterals that were prepared. We wanted it to be as authentic and as unscripted and as natural as it could be. For example, we used to ask them to take a simple selfie with their own smartphones. For example, Malavika, say a micro influencer I'm working with, she says that she's gone to a Punjabi wedding and she's trying to cut down, for example. And she says she sees so many unhealthy eating options in front of her. And then she uses the Healthify app, which quickly tells her through the image recognition OCR feature, which are the healthy options for her to eat, given her health goals. Now she quickly takes a screenshot, puts up a selfie of herself, and then she posts this on Twitter. Now she's an influencer, but still the way she has put this across is very unscripted, it's very natural, it's very slice of life-ish, and that was a core philosophy that we always adhere to as a brand. And that is something that worked well for us. So we didn't want a high production quality shoot, green screen shoot, all of that, no jing bang, right? We wanted it to be as unscripted as it could be. And that is something that we always followed. For example, Malavika is a busy working professional. She's forgotten to drink water whole day. She's been working on a presentation for 4 hours flat. She says she gets a water reminder on the Healthify app. She says, gosh, I forgot to drink water the whole day. Thanks to this, my cute little buddy, I was able to drink water now. Simple screenshot, a selfie, and you're done. And that was how, these were the kind of scripts that we used to initially spoon feed the influencers, but over time the influencers started doing this on their own. Now, as I said, you've got to think about, is it credibility that you're looking to score for? Or is it more around, convenience and aspirational index? Is that something that you're looking to score for? Is it short term or is it more sustained? And is this something that you're looking to build up over time? If it is short term, you typically veer more towards overt forms of communication, working with macro influencers, because New Year campaign, again, it's a very time bound thing. I need to do this on Jan 1st, Jan 2nd. That's it. After that, I've lost I'm not going to get that window again for the next year. So I might as well go all guns blazing, which is why we used both overt, we used initially to begin with macro and overt to give us that reach. Then to build on that reach, we then kept it micro and subtle. If you're looking for credibility, and if you are doing this for the long term, like I said, you use a combination of micro influencers and you keep it subtle. If it is credibility, again, but it is short term, like the World Yoga Day, for example, for which we are running campaigns for, you need to look for both reach. It's not just relatability. So you need the reach in a very short span of time that the macro influencer can provide, because that is where they come in, right? Because it is like, it's happening in 2 days time, or it's happening in a week's time. I don't have the time to build this thing up. This is short term. So I need the reach that, say, a Farhan Akhtar can give me, right? I don't have the time to build this up. It's not like a test match. It's like a T20, right? I don't have the time. So which is why you use the macro influencers. Like I said, if it is coolness, aspirational index, etc., that you're looking to over index towards, you use a combination of macro influencers and keeping it overt. Now, if it is coolness hip and it is over the long term, you use a combination of macro and micro subtle. But what I would typically suggest, given the kind of times that we live in, is macro subtle doesn't really make sense, which is why what you typically do is you start off with macro, keep it overt, which gives you that reach. Then you go micro and subtle, which helps you build on that reach. So it helps you first breadth, you go broad, then you go deep, using a combination of micro and subtle forms of influencer marketing. Like I said, just to summarize, micro influencers help you build credibility. They're best suited for long-term objectives. Like I said, not so much for short-term. They're more test match players. And they are best used alongside subtle communication. It's like roti and dal, right? They go together. Subtle forms of communication. Macro influencers, like I said, they help position the brand as a cool one, as an aspirational one. They work for long term, but especially more so for short term. Of course, you could still use them for long term. A lot of brands do it. And this is just my own line of thinking, that they are especially more suited for short term objectives. The best used alongside overt. Like I said, subtle is actually a waste of time today, because people are very nuanced. Audiences see through this. They know that people have taken money. They know what is advertising and what is not. So subtle is actually a waste of time. But there are interesting ways of doing this though, and brands are getting more and more intelligent. For example, there was this recent tweet, Instagram post by Kareena Kapoor, where she posted a picture of Saif Ali Khan saying, "My husband is looking really good," and and she put hashtag Vikram Veda. Now, no way in the world is that organic. Right, that is completely. So what they've done is they've done it very interestingly. The promoters of the film, they've not used Saif Ali Khan to be the quote unquote influencer, because he's directly associated with the film. Right. So what they have done is they've used his wife to actually subtly insert this, and she's not spoken about the movie at all, if you notice. Right. So they're doing it more intelligently. So I might want to scratch this, because people do keep getting creative all of the time. Now, I was able to catch that. I don't know how many people in the audience, for example, how many of you were able to catch that it is actually a paid influencer marketing effort. But people do get more and more creative, and these kind of subtle forms of influencer marketing do keep coming up. Now, let's have some fun before we wrap up for Q&A. I'll just give you some hypothetical scenarios. Would love to hear from you on what kind of strategies you would employ if you had to run influencer marketing campaigns in these kinds of situations. First one, Lakme has launched a line of new fairness creams. What do you think they would do? Would it be macro, micro, overt, subtle?
The audience can actually raise their hand if they'd like to
Which
get
says macro and
unmuted.
overt. And here again, this is a lot of
Yeah,
it is
we
art
have
form,
a
right
lot
brain.
of people saying macro, macro,
Yeah, I actually agree
micro,
with
and
Shivani.
subtle.
I actually agree with Shivani. I think it should be micro and subtle. But the marketing head at Lakme might not agree with me. But this is just my thought process. A lot of this is right brain scientific, not necessarily cut and right formulaic driven. But what I would do, basis what I just said, in this particular case again, I think trust and relatability. It depends on what the goals are for the brand. In my view, for a Lakme, for a fairness cream brand, trust and relatability are more important than coolness and aspirational index. And actually, let me qualify this. Let's say this is a line of fairness creams meant for middle-aged women, for example, 40 plus. Now, if I were to qualify that, then it becomes a very clear case of micro and subtle. Because in that case, it's not so much about showing off and it's not so much about aspirational index and glamour quotient. If it were for, say, teenage girls, I think a lot of you are right. I think you would probably need to use macro plus overt. Healthify Me has launched a new mental wellness product line. By the way, mental wellness, I think, is the unaddressed area when it comes to health and fitness in India. I think it's been an absolute pandemic in the country right now when it comes to mental wellness. Even the government has announced, a few toll-free numbers, etc. And I think if any of you have, business ideas, any of you entrepreneurs out there around mental wellness, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Yeah, micro overt. I think this is fairly correct. This is fairly straightforward. Obviously, here trust and relatability are the key. So micro and overt, that's an easy one. Thanks for that, Shivani. Ola has launched luxury car rentals, right, where they let you rent maybe a Jaguar, for example, or a Rolls Royce.
Lot of macros here.
Yeah, a lot of macro and overt again. Very straightforward. It's appealing to a very niche audience, more focused on glamour. So macro and overt. Now it's debatable whether it should be subtle or overt. Like I said, if you can make it intelligent, like in the Vikram Veda example, right, where Kareena Kapoor tweeted about, she says no association with the film. She tweeted about her husband with just a hashtag mention of the film. That's all, and it was a still from the film. So those kinds of indirect creative ways can be used to promote it. Then you can still use subtle forms of promotion with a macro, influencer. Haldiram's has launched a new sugar-free product line. Yep, Wish is correct. Micro and subtle, I agree. Here again, trust is the key thing. Sugar-free, not a lot of teenagers are going to use this. I think it should usually be people who are older, beyond the millennial bracket, I would say, not even millennials for the most part. So here again, trust is the key thing. Here's the other one, Cult Fit. I think I already let the cat out of the bag when I spoke about what we did at Healthify Me. Wants to drive a bunch of registrations for upcoming World Yoga Day. And let's say there is 2 weeks left. The marketers have got the planning wrong. Now they're scrambling at the last minute. They've been given a dressing down by the CEO. And now they're scrambling at the last minute to make this. They've got 2 weeks left. What would they start with in week 1? Let me put it that way. Yeah, Shivani is right. Macro and overt in week 1. And then you probably shift over into micro plus subtle in week 2. Here's a sense of some popular platforms. A lot of these you can look them up. A lot of these have free trials available, so you can sign up with them for free. A lot of these essentially are two-sided marketplaces, so you can sign up with them either as an influencer or as an advertiser. So let's say Malavika she's getting a lot of traction on social media. She feels she herself is an influencer, so she wants to make some income on the money on the side. So she signs up as an influencer on one or all of these platforms. Now I am say an advertiser, I am say Healthify Me. Now I am searching for influencers to market my upcoming campaign. Now I can go enter my targeting criteria. I say that I want influencers who are age 30 and less, whose audience profile is 60% plus women. I want only women as my influencers, and their followers should also be 60% plus women. And most of their 90% of their following needs to be India, and they need to be health and fitness influencers or fashion. Either of these, because health and fitness, fashion influencers, both of them look good. right? And they talk about a lot of healthy things, etc. So I say that these are my criteria. Now, depending on this, when Malavika signs up, she would also say that these are the categories that aligns with her. She will have to fill an entire questionnaire with these platforms. So what these platforms should do is it's like a two-way, it's like a matching platform. So the platform will essentially spit out some results and say that, you know what, Veda, these are the 20 influencers you can consider in India for this particular campaign. Now, in some cases, I can choose them. I can let the campaign, these marketplaces also take care of commercial negotiations as well. Or what I can do is I can do this one-on-one. I can get in touch with them and I can take these commercial conversations offline. A lot of these platforms make money by providing information. So in the free trial, what they would do is they would just show you the name. They would mask a lot of information. They would not allow you to get in touch. Or in some cases, they won't even show you the name. They'll show you one name. They'll hide everything else. Just for you to get a taste of the platform. So once you become a premium customer, you'll be able to access all of these features in depth. Of course, like I said, you could choose to do this on your own. You don't need to go through these platforms. You could choose to, in the early days, in fact, that's what I would recommend. You work with lesser number of influencers, but you handpick the influencers for your brand yourself. You curate them yourself. And you make sure that, like I said, in the Health Family case, we never work with influencers who just work for money. You make sure that these influencers are aligned with your brand vision and give them a taste of your product and service before you sign them up as influencers. That's all I had for you today. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Love to take any questions that you might have.
Great. I think one key takeaway also, Veda, was that initially all of us were thinking about from a brand perspective, whether we want to go for macro or a micro influencer. But then what you also brought about is it's important to see the use case and it's important to identify what kind of promotional activities you're looking at. So there are a couple of people who've raised their hand. I'll actually go ahead and unmute them and then take on the further questions. So there's Teja. Please go ahead and talk. You can unmute yourself now. Teja Mora. Yes, you've unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good evening.
Hi.
So I just want to discuss about my type of people. So I have a people which are representing the fan base of Sunrise Hyderabad. Like I have my own representatives of Orange Army in each and every engineering colleges.
What would be your question? Seems to be that you already have a fan following on an Instagram page.
Yeah.
What is your question to Mr. Veda?
How could this fan following will be related with the influencer marketing?
I think you've got a bunch of micro influencers already, Teja. The question is, if you're paying them, you've got your own army of micro influencers, and you seem to have got your targeting reasonably right again. Because here again, if it is Sunrisers Hyderabad, and I'm assuming these are engineering colleges spread all across Andhra, right? Andhra, Telangana, the entire region. And you've got the demographic right. IPL is mostly watched by higher school kids and college kids, and followed by millennials. So I think you've got your targeting right as well. So it looks like you're already working with micro influencers. I think what you need to consider is what kind of content you put out. I think that to me is the key, which will differentiate the success of your campaigns. Is it going to be regular kind of content, or is it going to be something more interesting, something more hatke? Memes, for example, could be something that you could try. It's like the entire country seems to be running on memes right now. We seem to have the great ability to make memes out of any situation, right? Yeah, however bad it is, we seem to come out with some fantastically funny memes and we're able to have a good laugh. For example, memes could be a great kind of content that all of your fans could potentially use if you could unlock that creativity. Look at creating interesting memes, funny memes, etc., which can drive a lot of earned media buzz around Sunrisers Hyderabad. Contests which you don't run as a brand directly. That could be another one which you could consider, Teja. I hope that helps you.
Yeah, I'm already using it from the last 2 years. And the other thing, what I did with my fan base thing is I have collaborated with the overseas consultancy, because I have I have Orange Army representatives in each and every engineering college. Okay. So that I'm with my idea, I related that with the overseas consultancies,
Sure.
and I help them in the marketing.
Nice.
Great.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Teja. We have a lot of more questions. If you don't mind, we'll move to the next one. There's a lady, Supriya. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi Veda. It was a really good webinar. I wanted to know, in terms of investment, how investment heavy is influencer marketing?
It depends. I mean, if it's a big macro influencer, for example, for a single post, they could charge you, several lakhs. If you work with a bunch of micro influencers, say 100 micro, for example, the pregnancy thing, right? Work with 100, recent young mothers from all across India, and the entire campaign was wrapped up in under 5-6 lakhs. So it depends on the kind of influencers that you work with. It's completely different. And then in some cases, you might even want to work with nano influencers, extremely small guys. And you want to work with a whole bunch of them. A lot of hashtag trending activities happens that way. So it depends on the a lot of it comes down to the kind of influencers you work with.
Right, and how much control do you have on the content?
Of content is all decided by you, of course. And it depends. In some cases, especially with some micro influencers who are, for example, who don't like to think of themselves as sellouts, right? And they want to have a say on the kind of content that goes out, and it needs to align with who they are as a brand as well. They would have their own personal brand, and the content needs to align with their own brand. So usually the content is proposed by the brand, and it is usually it gets signed off unless the content is way off. But of course the macro influencer does have a say because it's their social media platform after all.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Moving to the next question, Anvi Gandhi, she's asking you, we're into healthy snacks and I'd like to know what kind of influencer marketing should we go ahead with and how effective is barter collaborations on Instagram?
I think barters you could always try and see, of course, in your case, I think if it's healthy, I would always suggest subtle and micro. I think we already got that from the presentation. But barters, I've tried this a lot and I'm at a point in my life where I've come to realize that barters work only between equals. Otherwise, everybody else wants money. So if the kind of social following that you have is equal to the kind of social following that the other person, the other influencer, right, who's sitting on the other end of the table also has, then obviously that person would be willing to work with you on a barter, saying, I'll do something, I'll promote your brand, you promote mine. For example, at Health and Family, we used to work with Archana's Kitchen a lot, and it was a complete barter deal. She again was an influencer, very popular, nutritionist, etc. She had her own cookery shows, and both brands with fairly similar levels of maturity. Now, if one becomes bigger than the other, that's where it becomes a problem, and barters don't necessarily work unless there is something at stake which will excite the other person, the bigger person. It's obviously the smaller person has a lot to gain. The bigger person doesn't have enough to gain from the barter deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Moving to the next question, Mittal has asked, I run this art-based lifestyle and fashion brand called Over a Pint of Beer. And we have tried influencer marketing with a good mix of micro and macro influencers. Macro was subtle with Kalki coaches, but my question is, how do I figure out loyalties amongst these influencers? They usually keep moving from one brand to the other. Is there any way we can leverage their reach and get their loyalty to be relevant to my target group?
You could bake it into the agreement. I mean, a lot of brands, we used to do that. For example, if I'm getting a micro influencer to work with me, I don't want them turning around the next day and posting something about cult fit, right, or Goki. It becomes a problem. So that's something which you can bake into your arrangement, and I think that's an absolute must-have in my view. Otherwise, it just becomes regular brand endorsement. All of the effort that you've put in building that. So maybe I'm a little too naive, but my strong line of thought is that if I'm able to see through the ad that isne paise liya, then to me that is not even influencer marketing. That is just regular brand endorsement. So you should make it as difficult as possible, even for the discerning viewer, to see through that. That recent one, like I mentioned, right, the Vikram Veda one, Saif Ali Khan with Kareena Kapoor saying, "My husband is looking so hot." She didn't mention anything about the film directly. It was just an image from the movie. I thought that was a fantastic example. Even though Virat Kohli, right? All of us remember the Indira Nagar Ka Gunda, right? That Rahul Dravid, famous ad by Cred. Virat Kohli posted saying, "मैंने राहुल भाई को ऐसा कभी नहीं देखा," and he posted a link of that video. Like a lot of people thought it was authentic. It is actually, again, very nicely done, subtle form of macro influencer marketing. Virat Kohli obviously, right, at that scale, nobody does any video about a brand just like that. So I think I kind of got off topic, but to your point, I think you need to make, in my view, you need to make sure that you build in that level of loyalty, into your agreement itself. And one of the other things that you also can do is try to see if you can bake that in the initial days itself. By having the influencer experience your product or service first, so they don't just end up becoming a mercenary. For example, Cult did that really well with Milind Soman. Right, Milind Soman was and continues to be an advocate of Cult as an influencer, as a brand ambassador as well. And he is somebody who has actually experienced Cult services, and he has actually endorsed it. He has given it its stamp of approval. For example, at Simply Learn, we had this entire concept of course advisors. If you think of it, they were actually influencers. So these are people, if you're looking to pick, say, digital marketing, if you're looking to learn data science, if you're looking to learn project management, iOS, Android programming, we would pick some of the global thought leaders in each of these spaces. So if you're an aspirant in that space, that thought leader would be somebody you look up to. So we would have them as course advisors, and we would make sure that we get their buy-in on the syllabus, and their stamp of approval is there on the syllabus. So they're essentially endorsing the course. And we also had it as part of the agreement that they wouldn't go and work with any of our competitors. So these are some things for you to keep in mind.
Thank you. That was very valuable, Veda. Moving to the next question from Mr. Chetan. He's asked, how do I now differentiate between a micro and a nano influencer? Are there any guidelines?
I think that's, again, just semantics, and nano is more a recent phenomenon. For example, nano is just people who are further down on the pyramid but have like fantastic engagement rates. Right. And for example, we ourselves would know people in our own social media circles, friends, family, ourselves, some of us here in the room might be getting some fantastic traction on social media. Every post that we make gets 100 likes, 200 likes, but our follower base isn't huge. We'll never hit 1,000, 2,000, 20,000 likes. We don't have like 1 million followers, but within our circle of influence, we do a really good job. So that essentially is nano influencers, where the circle is smaller.
Right. Moving to the next question, there's a lady who asks, what are the top industries for which influencer marketing really works?
So I think influencer marketing, in all honesty, is more B2C first, followed by, I'm not trying to say it's not applicable on B2B. It's more B2C first. It's more directly amenable to B2C. And even there, it works better in categories like health and fitness, in categories like fashion. It works better in those kinds of categories. Having said that, even in B2B, it does have a space, and where you still can try influencer marketing, which is slightly more subtle, but it is more B2C first.
Great. Moving to the next one, Mr. Pratik Agarwal, he asks, how much do micro influencers usually charge, and what kind of subscribers, average video views do we have to look at? How do you select who's good to go for?
So micro influencers, like I said, either if you're curating it on your own, look for some of the warning signs that I mentioned to make sure nobody is defrauding you. And micro influencers are any people anywhere in that broad range between 10-20,000 followers to all the way up to 70-80,000 followers odd. All the way up to close to the macro. While it's not a hard line, right? It's not a hard line, but essentially in that broad range, people who are there, people who are not like celebrities. They don't know. If somebody tells that person's name, everybody would know, right? In that broad construct, that essentially is who a micro influencer is. And within that, you want one thing that you need to look for, especially if the guy is not a celebrity, is essentially in that micro space, not necessarily a macro space, is in this kind of a follower base range. Make sure that engagement rates are fairly high single digits or 10%, right? That needs to be like the minimum cutoff. So these are things that you look for, and within that as well, try to make sure, see if there is real engagement, which is comments, and rich engagement. If you're curating it yourself, if you're picking it from one of these platforms, you can put your criteria right there in terms of follower, max, min, etc. And you can, the platforms will suggest the influencers for you. And once you do that in terms of commercials, which was the first part of your question, the example that I gave you, we worked with 100 young mothers, for the young mothers plan that we launched, and all of that came under 6-7 lakhs, and all of that involved like 3-4 posts in a given month, and we got a really good deal. And of course, it varies from case to case. Usually, micro influencers per post, they charge around 5,000 to 10,000 bucks.
Right, right. So, Shivani's fantastic session. Thank you so much. But could you also touch on how a very early stage brand or a startup could actually start their influencer marketing journey? Do you suggest nano, micro, and then macro, or do you just suggest put aside a budget and go directly macro?
I think one of the things that you could think about if you're very early stage, if you're bootstrapped, you don't have VC money to burn, is probably work with somebody mentioned barter. I think that's a very interesting thought. I think that is something that you should look for. And one of the best forms of influencers and advocates for your brand can be your customers. And while that might sound like gyan and philosophical, in making sure that you provide that ideal level of customer service, so your customers end up becoming your advocates. For example, Ankur Wariku, right, who's a very popular thought leader out there. He is an absolute advocate in almost every single forum. He says really good things about Razorpay, and we haven't asked him to say any good things about us. And that is because he's like a customer of several of our products, right? On the payment side, on Razorpay X, on payroll, he uses so many different commercial cards, uses so many different products, and he has like amazing things to say about us, and he always raves about us. And that to me is one of the best forms of influencer marketing. And the other thing is, that is the ideal case, of course, where your customers end up becoming your influencers and advocates. Or the other thing is, look for these kinds of barter deals. For example, with Archana's Kitchen, what we had going back at Health Economy, and you can find some of these barter influencers who have the same kind of shared brand vision, and both of you speak to the same customer demographic bucket, and you're not competitors, right? One of the best ways is a travel blog and a travel commerce site, right? There's direct synergy there, direct possibilities of a marriage. Both of you speak to the same demographic. Both of you are possibly, say, potentially, if you're at the similar points in the life cycle, and you're not competitors, right? And there is direct synergy possible, wherein you could have these kinds of barter deals happening. In the early days, that's what I would suggest before committing actual money, using influencer marketing. I would rather you invest dollars in more predictable channels like performance marketing or in SEO, creating content, etc.
Right, right. Moving to the next one, Mr. Gandhi is asking, at what stage do you know that it's now time to hire an agency versus doing it in-house?
Once you've started seeing, in this case, PMF, product market fitment, I would say, once you've started seeing results from some of your initial efforts in influencer marketing, some of the metrics that I mentioned, it is then possibly time for you to consider using an agency. I'm never a big fan of using an agency in the first place, but if this is something that you don't have the time for, so there are two situations. One is you're very early stage and you just don't have the time as the founder and or the expertise in-house. Combination of both, sorry. You don't have the time and you don't have the expertise. You just don't have the time and you want to experiment with this. In that case, you obviously go with an agency. The second case is you've seen some fantastic results with your influencer marketing campaigns and you want to take it to the next level and you want to get some outside opinions on how you can do this better. In which case you bring in an agency at least to give some ideas on how you can, take this to the next level and try to see if those ideas resonate. Right. Use them at least for creative horsepower, if not for execution horsepower.
Absolutely. Akshata Agarwal, she says, for YouTube and influencers, what's the average rate of an influencer? Some charge 40,000, some to 80,000 per video, but how does one decide the worth and the ROI?
I think again, it depends on the kind of traction that their videos get previously. I think that is something for you to consider. I think one of the benchmarks for you, Akshata, is look at the kind of CPMs that you would get if you are directly running ads on YouTube, if you are directly running ads on Facebook. Let's say your Facebook CPMs are 150, 100 bucks, 120 bucks. Your YouTube CPMs are 200, 250 bucks, for example, right? And then you should typically apply a haircut on that, right? So if I'm running an influencer marketing campaign, you apply a haircut of at least 30, 40%, which means that the max I'll be willing to pay, if I'm getting like 100 and 150 bucks, max I'm willing to pay for CPM. For 1,000 views, I can pay 100 bucks. That is a maximum that I can pay. So you can use that construct and use that as a North Star in your negotiations which you conduct with the influencer. I hope that helps.
Right. Mr. Goldie is asking, can influencer marketing be used to cover the entire supply chain? In movies, from promos to distribution channel to endorsements to casting to audience, or in the case of a cosmetic business, from factory to on-road logistics and distributor, retailer to final consumer?
I didn't understand the second part, but for the first part on movies, yes, you certainly can. For example, Apart from why this Kolaveri one of the biggest examples of influencer marketing was, what was that? Why did Katappa kill, Bahubali? Right? I think that again was a fantastic example of influencer marketing. That was literally the only thing they did. There was no direct marketing. Of course, the trailer for the film, which was out there, which was a fantastic trailer for Bahubali 2, which came out, they pumped a lot of money into that. But apart from that, there were two main astras in their marketing, quiver. One was their trailer. They had a fantastic trailer that they came out with for the movie. The second one was all of the stuff was around why Katappa killed, I don't remember the name of the hashtag. It was why did Katappa, the names, right? They created an anagram with that. And that was something that they used. So certainly, yes. I think the first question was around movies. I didn't understand your second question. Sorry. Would you mind repeating that? The second part of your question.
Yeah, I think maybe Mr. Chawla, you could just say that or maybe type it in. Wasn't real. We couldn't understand that, but we'll move on to the next question. And since we're running out of time as well, maybe last one or two questions, although we still have many more, but there's a lady, Harshita, who's asking you, so what type of influencer will we use for the service industry, especially if we're doing a niche area around international freight forwarding?
It's an interesting one. I think this is where it gets a little tricky. On B2B, it gets a little tricky. I think one of the best ways is obviously customers. If you can get your customers to say good things about you for free. And the other thing is, I don't know if you have, the thing is that you need the influencer that you work with, needs to have a strong social following in the target demographic segment that you're speaking to. So in this case, if it is international freight forwarding, etc., as a B2B company, what I would choose is somebody who has a very strong fan following on LinkedIn. Right? Because the key decision makers and the target companies that you're speaking to, I'm assuming, are white collar professionals fairly active on LinkedIn. Say they are supply chain heads, vendor procurement heads, or exporter heads, importer heads, etc. I'm assuming in some of these guys, if not all, would be fairly prominent on LinkedIn. Plus, you want, in this case, in B2B, you're not just looking to impress that target customer persona, but you're also looking to impress your prospective partner, prospective investor, prospective channel partner persona as well. A lot of these guys are usually active on LinkedIn. So which is why I would pick somebody, a LinkedIn celebrity like a Nankur Variku or Alok Kejriwal, for example. People like these as potential influencer candidates.
Right. We'll take the last one here. Mr. Dinesh Prabhu is asking you, is there any industry or business that you would suggest not to go for an influencer because it has no or minimum impact?
I don't know if it's an edtech company selling to school principals. If it's a B2B edtech company, I meant. If it's a B2B edtech company selling to schools, or if it is high-end B2B, right, where you're selling to Tata, Reliance, Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies. At least I haven't seen that, and I'm not able to envisage the how influencer marketing can work apart from customer testimonials and word of mouth coming through. So in that case, I would say if it is high-end B2B, let me put it that way, not just regular B2B. At Razorpay on the SME side, it's not regular B2B. It's SMEs are very similar to how B2C works. If it is high-end B2B, then yes.
One more, just the last one. Mr. Anand is asking you, so can we ask an influencer for their metrics, for their audience, their location, parameters? Can we get such information from them?
Yeah, you can always ask if they are willing to, if they have the data, they'll be willing to share. A lot of this information is publicly available. That's one. Even if it is not, you can always look up the influencer. If they are on one of these platforms, you can find that information anyway, if you're subscribed.
Right. We'll take further questions on our Global Linker community page where you can post them and we'll have Mr. Veda answer them. But thank you so much for this session. I think it was a very brilliantly, the examples that you used were very co-relatable. So thank you, Mr. Veda, for helping everybody understand about influencer marketing.
Thank you so much, Malavika. Thanks to the Global Linker team and all of the people who decided to spend an hour of their Friday evening here in this session. I hope this was value additive and I hope this was beneficial for you. I wish all of you success in your businesses, good health, take care and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.